Hello, everybody. So the idea is that being this a roundtable, ONF as an initial presentation, then I want to open the floor up to anybody of you who has some interest in ONAP and wants to share the vision of his company. And I know, for example, like Telecom Italia has some slides. Then if you're interested, we also can go deep dive a little bit into the technical details with me and Gopi. But having said that, Larry's going to give an initial statement on what we at ONF think will be the integration between ONAP and Cord. And then we can open up the stage for everybody. Thanks, Larry.
So all I'm going to do is replay a couple of the slide I had up earlier today. And this gives everyone a chance to react to it, which wasn't possible earlier. ONAP's global. Cord is a local thing. It's at the very, very edge. We would obviously imagine ONAP being orchestrating across multiple cords. I'm showing only one here. But if a prime example is eCord, where today we have a little stub of a global thing just for demonstration purposes, managing 3 eCord pods and setting up a wide area network between them, and then instantiating VNFs at each one of them. So that would be an example, obviously, of global versus local. So point 1, global, local. Point 2 is that Cord offers a northbound interface that ONAP can interact with. We have not worked through all the details, but if you walk through the analytics piece, the inventory piece, the MSO piece, the orchestration piece, it's easy to imagine how, with a little work, that you could cause those to sync up. In particular, we're able to generate the APIs here. So we've generated a Tusk API, and ONAP typically goes around specifying services with heat templates, but we could generate a heat template. If you wanted a Vim interface, we could generate a Vim interface. The point is, to the extent the ONAP has well-defined interfaces, which I believe, as far as I know, it does, then we believe that you could have those interfaces here. In terms of the MSO in particular, what you would be doing would be asking Cord to provision a service. I mean, that's what it does when it goes to AIC. It's what it would do when it would come to Cord. It's what it would do if it went to any multi-tenant cloud. Please provision some VNFs. And that means spin up the VMs and get the VNFs running in them. That's point 2. Point 3 is this is not a hard fixed line with ONAP on one side and Cord on the other. What I think is going to happen is we might start there for POC purposes, but we're going to find pieces of ONAP that want to live here. Pieces of ONAP already live in the larger data centers like AT&T's integrated cloud, so certainly they could live here. The very first obvious candidate for something of ONAP that would have a local point of presence is DCAE collectors. And so there's already a telemetry monitoring service in Cord. We're doing some POCs, which you'll hear about tomorrow, I think, in the A-Cord session, that just shows, yeah, we could interface between a little representative in here and DCAE running globally. Okay, global, local. We can adapt the interfaces, and there will be pieces of ONAP that will eventually live in here. I guess point 4 is that there are some interesting local things, and this really comes down to control loops. There are some things that happen in here that are very fine-grained. The more disaggregated my services are, the more work I have to do to link up the service chains, and so that's a local thing that runs in a tight loop. We didn't show a lot of examples here, but as we've kind of worked through, especially in the MCord case, and we've gone out to the XRAN, out to the RAN case, there's some very fine-grained control loops that would be, I think in ONAP speak, they're level 0 loops. Am I getting the levels right? Loop 0. So there will be some loops in here that would then report out to an ONAP. And that's kind of the role that the collector, is an example, might play. I guess, I forget where I'm at, maybe point 5 is there's other stuff that goes on at the edge that has nothing to do with provisioning services in the more traditional sense, and that all has to do with subscribers. And to my understanding, there is no subscriber aspect of what ONAP is doing. That's a finer grained thing. And so Cord is actually taking its instructions from sort of 2 sources and it has enough state being maintained here to figure out how they mesh together. So I think, again, this is just preliminary. We've started to do some POCs, tons and tons of opportunity. This is clearly going to be a very important thing to figure out, and we're just starting down that path. Tom?
If I look at local code as a distributed cloud, are they running independent of one another? Do they have to be synchronous? Your cache database here, for example, if it represents configuration and behavior of a local core, does it have to be synchronized with the other local core that is in group with this edge?
This is a little bit aside from ONAP. This would be a cache. We would have to have a cache invalidation policy of some kind. That anytime this changed, this would probably maybe get a TTL and go out and check. I'm not sure what the implementation would be. But more generally, in terms of doing global orchestration across multiple cords, we will need something there. But I would think that the onus on that one would be on ONAP to say if it's ONAP's responsibility to do global orchestration and get these 16 pods doing something coordinated with a backbone, there has to be a mechanism to do that, and we would just follow whatever rules we were given. I don't think Cord shouldn't have any. I mean, one of the things we would like to do here is that Cord doesn't depend on ONAP and suddenly has to be global aware. It's just doing what it's told. It's purely a local autonomous thing.
The interfaces between ONAP and the local cores, do they have to do a two-phase commit or some kind of netconf? So if you have to backtrack everyone, can you backtrack it?
That would be a reasonable thing to assume, but I don't know I don't know the extent to which ONAP has pushed that boundary yet. So there are ONAP experts in the room? We're all trying to figure it out, I think. Yep.
Any other questions for Larry on ONF thoughts around ONAP?
Larry, the question is in the morning when you did the presentation about these slides, you give examples how to integrate interwork the core with ONAP in the. So you explain that what the purple dot, the large dot.
These guys?
Yeah. You give the examples. I forgot that.
Can I write on this board, this wall? So I could draw some other. So what I've drawn here is in Cord speak a service chain or a service instance graph. And this would be allocated one per subscriber. And on behalf of this subscriber, it's linear, it wouldn't have to be. In fact, in the other room right now, Scott's describing how it could be an arbitrary graph, and could be classifiers that fork this way and join and coming back. But on behalf of each subscriber, you will have visited a set of 1, 2, 3, 4, some number of services, and you'll have your own instance of that service. Because everything's a service, and these services are multi-tenant, and I get tenancy in those services, and that tenancy is going to show through. So that's what one of these turns out to be. In parallel with that, and it's the case in Cord as well, there is a service graph. And my view of it is ONAP would tell Cord, this is a service graph you should instantiate. I went out and bought a bunch of, I'm a carrier, I went out and bought a bunch of services. I got rights to the VNFs. They take VMs this big. Please set up 6 VMs and run this service in it. That's service provisioning. So there would be the service graph here as well, as instructed by ONAP. I mean, Cord has an interface to let you do that, but Cord doesn't care what services you tell it to do. Having done that, when a subscriber fires up their home router, knowing what that service graph was, not shown, I would find out some parameters that would cause me to visit a particular sequence of the services and spin off this particular service chain.
Yeah. You assume the ONAP will print the service graph.
I assume an ONAP or someone northbound of Cord will tell me what the service graph is. Yeah. I mean, when we build, when we build, obviously, when we build a package, a solution, it comes. We play that role in that we say we're going to build our Cord and we're going to drop these 6 services into it. Now let me run with that just a little bit. you could take that particular solution and you could go to ONAP and say, I'm here now and I have these 6 services. And that actually would feed into the ONAP Design Studio, and there would be record that this particular purple edge knows how to instantiate these 6 services. And maybe a vanilla OpenStack doesn't know about those services because some of them are ONAS based. So this is a good point. Because Cord can be preloaded with some services, or capable of being loaded with them, you just tell me to do it and how to provision them, we could output from Cord, I am specially configured to do mcord. I have available these 6 services. I am now registering. I think that technically that would be called onboarding. I will now register them with ONAP, and then at the operator's discretion, they could say, yeah, I think those are good services. Please instantiate them and provision them with this many VMs.
So another thing I'm thinking, basically in the core level, you need to manage the service and the resource. So when you are from your personal point of view, should we report the resource to the ONAP level and let the ONAP to manage the local resource?
That would, if this pod were to be managed by ONAP, that would make complete sense. I would, and I'm not showing AIA, I forget the acronym, the inventory piece. It's a,
okay.
All right, so I don't know how that API is set up exactly, but either there's an up call or a query, and I would say I am capable of running 47 VMs with 6 cores each, or however that's said, and then I could leave it to ONAP to do that. Yep.
So your core XOS or do the resource instantiations, right? You create the service graph, and then link the instance to each node, right, in the graph.
Yeah, it's the other way around, that the service is the owner of a set of instances, one per subscriber.
Okay. So the association and the instantiation of the resource, you expect the ONAP will help you to do that?
From an allocating of cores and memory and so on to a service, Cord entirely takes that instruction from above.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. I know also Tim has some interesting words to say about their ideas around ONAP and their thoughts.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Carlo Cavazzoni from Team Telecom Italia, that is the incumbent service provider in Italy. And I will just share a few ideas that we have and the proposal for a simple use case that we think could be useful to test the possible integration between Cord and ONAP. For describing the use case scenario, I will use just as an example a network that represents the network demonstrator based on Cord that we are building in our labs. And just to remind you, if you are interested in having more detail, that on Thursday afternoon I will present and describe this network. The very simple service is an enterprise core, the carrier Ethernet service. A simple point-to-point carrier Ethernet connectivity between 2 customer sites that are connected to different central offices through a metro transport network. Even with a very simple service like this one, we need a coordination between different elements. So the service cannot be closed in a single node, but you have to coordinate the 2 access nodes together with the transport network that we imagine is configured through a transport SDN controller. So in this scenario, we think is important to have an upper layer orchestrator that is able to put together all the different segments of the network. And we think that the role of this network orchestrator can be done by ONAP, or at least some component of ONAP. So this is our proposal for a simple use case to start the integration between the two worlds. And we try just to have a look to the structure of ONAP, and at least in a first attempt, we think that the component that could be used for this integration in OpenApp are the service design and creation, that is the component that should model the service and define in a design time the service chain. And so this is the component that has to have the view of the entire network and define the different components of the service. And then for the implementation in real time, the master service orchestrator, the MSO, that has the interface to receive from the customer the request to create the Ethernet connectivity, and should be able to pass through some interface to the core environment all the information needed to create the service on the access nodes and to configure the geographical connectivity on the transport network. So basically, this is the scenario that we propose as a possible use case. And we haven't done many activities on this. It's a starting point, and we have a lot of doubts, and I just try to put some open points, something that we think has to be discussed. For instance, how to establish a cooperation between the two communities, then to understand in detail the different components that are available in core ONAP, and evaluate the potential overlapping, or as Larry mentioned before, if some component can be moved from one part to the other. Then to define the API between the two environments. And another thing that I think it could be difficult is to understand which information have to be exchanged in terms of topology, in terms of resources, physical resources to be used, or service resources. So these are all open points that we put here just for discussion. That's all.
Thanks, Carlo. Any questions?
I think from an architecture perspective, the outcome you want is you don't want to onboard resource component twice, right? You don't want to do an XOS onboarding and then go to ONAP SDC and onboard, the same resource components again. So I guess the question for yourself is, what do you see as the ideal subservice onboarding process when you have core combined with ONAP?
I really don't have an answer, a clear answer. I think it's something that has to be evaluated maybe in a new group that studies more in detail these points. I think this is something that has to be defined, where you have to create things, and because I think that there are many things that now done by core in XOS and maybe could be done in the master service orchestration in ONAP, and I think we should not duplicate the functionalities.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's interesting you mentioned about the API as well, because when we look at ONAP, so I'm from Telstra anyway, so when we look at ONAP, there's a multi-cloud project going on, and it talks about integration with vanilla OpenStack, with OpenStack, Microsoft Azure. So there is sort of a framework for integrating with various cloud environments. I guess the question is, should we treat Core as one of those multi-cloud environments? Or it's a very advanced and abstracted domain, so it certainly serves special treatment, right? So yeah, I guess that's something we need to discuss in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we can answer from the ONF's point of view. We'd like to hear others, because this is a very fundamental question that we are trying to answer as well. To answer the previous nuanced question that you asked, is the onboarding going to happen twice or once? And if it's once, where is the onboarding going to happen? Again, a lot of this is speculation, because from what we have learned, right now, the only public interface that we are aware of is the Cloud Driver, Vim Driver interface with OpenStack and WindRiver and a bunch of stuff. In the long term, we don't think that's going to be enough. But let's assume that we are trying to onboard a service or a service chain through XOS. Going back to what Larry touched upon briefly, we are thinking of a feedback loop from the local edge to the global orchestrator, ONAP orchestrator, where we are able to create assets in the A&AI framework of ONAP that will let them recognize the services or components that we are onboarding in XOS. So we envision tentatively ONAP as the official onboarding framework. But if for some reason you're not able to onboard using ONAP, we are hoping to be able to provide an interface where you can onboard using XOS, and XOS is able to feed it back so that you just onboard it once. There's
two kinds of onboarding.
Yeah.
There's just knowledge that the service exists and you onboarded the model. That's like free. And then you actually provision it. So you can, XOS can say, or Core can say, I know what this service looks like because it was tailor-made for Core, because it did ONAS this or that. Here's the spec, and now I will respond to your instructions to provision.
So that's one aspect. The second aspect is what you touched upon is, can we use the Vim SDK or the Vim layer, the cloud driver layer, as an interface between ONAP and a local edge where XOS and Cord are running? Will that be enough? I'm not sure of. We're not sure of that. We just beginning to see that interface SDK. In fact, Murat, who's standing at the back from Verizon, I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on a spot. He's been looking at that, and at this stage, it feels like that is the one workable interface that we can work with. We were really hoping for extensions to be available in the SDN controller, the AppC controller, the policy framework, the ANAI framework. I think there is intent to provide driver or plugin kind of architectures to that. It just doesn't exist today. Either it doesn't exist or we are not aware of it. So we're looking for those extensions, and as they become more available. For instance, I personally think we at least need some sort of a plugin architecture for the SDN controller so that it can delegate some of the responsibilities, at least on the edge, to the local edge controller. I don't see how we can control the traffic between the different, the one that you showed, between the different edge components without some sort of control being delegated down. So how we go about doing that, if the Vim driver is going to be enough, we are not sure, because the Vim driver potentially will be taking heat templates or OpenStack definitions as input, and be able to output Tosca. But are the heat templates going to be enough? Are they just going to be some sort of an infrastructure template where they say you just spin up a bunch of VMs, which XOS can do, no problem. But is that going to be enough? Or do we need more configuration? I do think that we need more configuration. We need more extension capabilities, but we are just beginning. If there is somebody who's gone a little further, we'd like to hear about their experiences, if that's possible.
I think Tom has an observation.
I think this question, if I got it correctly, is saying that should there be a shim layer, multi-cloud layer, you treat core just like another. That's okay. I don't need it. I can't speak loud. So you can just treat core just like another cloud, like Azure or AWS, etc. This multi-layer detects that this is core, and it would apply the right plugins to take orders from ONAP. Or Azure could, we could be collaborating with Azure and AWS, etc. in the ring, and this multi-cloud thing can do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess it's really a progression of the multi-cloud project itself, right? So today that interface is basic. There could be more comprehensive capabilities added to it, with
Right.
Multi-cloud SDN interconnected together. How do you collect data from multi-cloud? Maybe that the same interface can expose those as well. So, but I think the use case will be, it's very unlikely the operator will have a pure core environment.
Sure.
That we're all like brownfield operation. So you might have a end-to-end service where components sit in port, sit in some other, OpenStack or non-OpenStack environment. Maybe even components sitting on public cloud, and it's part of the same service. So in that case, having that one sort of shim layer of interface will be quite powerful, right?
So the shim layer that uses CORD as an infrastructure service provider like Azure or AWS, I don't think that is a useful use case. It's going to be a part of a bigger solution. We can definitely use the Vim driver as the service deployment framework that some of the presentation that Larry talked about. But if you want the local SDN controller to be able to manage the traffic between the different edges, we need more control than that. There has to be an autonomy that Larry was talking about. Implementation-wise, we are yet to determine how to do that.
Well, the fundamental problem is that ONAP's sweet spot so far has been to manage an OpenStack deployment. And now we're imagining a whole richer set of non-OpenStack services. So there has to be, I would like to see it personally that it was sort of the service adapter.
Exactly.
Right, and compute as a service or OpenStack as a service is one example.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Oh, yes.
Just it's fine with the microphone. At a higher level, is there kind of any market intelligence out there about ONAP and who's using it for what purposes, and where does it overlap with CORD and that?
In terms of participation in ONAP, we do know that AT&T is a big part. China Mobile is a big part. They provided the pieces in ONAP that does service orchestration. Amdocs is a big participant of this ONAP effort. In terms of adoption, at least we are not aware of any. If you're asking, are there any field trials going on? We are not aware of it. But I'm pretty sure there are people already looking at it, as you can see from the crowd, that there's definite interest. I do know that people are trying to look at what the SDKs are, what the documentation is, how far we can take it in terms of extensibility, and so on. So internally, I'm pretty sure AT&T has its own implementation of ONAP for both the edge as well as the central office, but we are not aware of any.
I can tell you that it's called eCom previously, but I think they are trying to adopt ONAP, fully as is. So there are other adoptions. If you look at the ONAP membership, it's like huge in terms of number of collaborators, 70 plus.
And the fact that they use open daylight in it, I mean,
Yeah.
is that, has there been any experimentation with using ONUS in there instead of open daylight?
I don't think there's been experimentation with ONOS as the replacement controller, because from what we have heard or what we have read in the documentation, Open Daylight is not an independent component. in ONAP. It's a framework that is being used to implement multiple pieces. The SDN controller, the app controller, the design input controller, the ANAI. The big pieces are being used, use Open Daylight as the framework. So some for configuration, some for network control. We view the role of ONAP as a global orchestrator for configuration, and the network control is on the edge with ONOS. So replacement, I don't think there is any. Extension is what we are hoping for. There's, again, I'm going to put words in Murad's mouth, but what we talked about was there's going to be an upcoming release of ONAP where there are no official extensions, but in the next release that's being planned early next year, there is discussions, open discussions around which pieces of ONAP will be extensible. And one very important piece is the SDN controller. So the idea is the Open Daylight based SDN controller that is native to ONAP will delegate some of the networking responsibilities down to a third-party SDN, not necessarily ONOS, but any SDN controller. And ONOS will be one of the reference implementations. Yeah. Murad.
So the ONAP is the merge of the ECOM and OpenO project. And the ECOM project doesn't have the third-party controller management, but the OpenO has it. And now, after the merge, there is no integration for the third-party controller integration. But in the roadmap, there are. So we are discussing and we are talking in the ONAP teams and the groups, so how can we integrate or how can we enhance the API so to manage the or handle the third-party control? Or how can we put the multi-view integration, how can we put the core architecture inside the ONAP without losing any capabilities inside the core architecture also? Because if we only use the multi-view, we will lose lots of the enhancements in the cores. And we only use the OpenStack part. So, but most of them, there is the ONOS part and the service function mechanism is more important in the core architecture. So that's what we are discussing.
So ONAP can interact with physical devices.
ONAP will...
If you gave it the right model. Yeah. So you could think of CORD as a black box. It's a piece of hardware that just happens to do both. And if it hadn't happened to use commodity stuff on the inside, but it used 100% proprietary, it wouldn't have to be able to interface.
Yes.
So therefore, it ought to be able to interface with something that just happened to use cloud technology on the inside. Don't tell ONAP that. Don't have it treated as a VIM, have it treated as a device. And that wouldn't even have a set of services it offered, an access service or whatever happened to be.
And also, we have a couple of brigades, and we are inviting you to contribute. This is the most important part, because we need more.
Yeah, so we are following the development of ONAP CORD integration in the orchestration brigade that Murad is leading. We meet every Friday at 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Well, not all Fridays, some Fridays. It's on the open calendar of CORD. Please do let us know if you don't know how to access the open calendar, we can show you. But yeah, we are meeting either, for the past few weeks, we've been meeting every week, but the idea is to meet every 2 weeks. And we are discussing what the latest progress is in terms of research. We have also divided some tasks among ourselves, trying to investigate extension capabilities of the Vim driver, the SDNC driver, the AppC driver, the SDC, and the ANAI, which we think are the primary components of ONAP. If you would like to contribute, we welcome any contributions that we can get from you. And if you have any unique use cases for your needs, we would like to hear about them as well, because that will give us more inputs on where exactly the interfaces need to live.
And I think that would be the perfect place for some of the questions that arose today to go in deeper technical discussion also with the other people that are developing and integrating ONAP and Cord. So thanks to Tim for sparking such a good discussion, and thanks everybody for participating.